It started on a gray Thursday morning, the kind of day where the news just feels heavier. The streets outside the courthouse were swarming with reporters, cameras clicking like firecrackers. Inside, the air was thick with judgment, even before the trial began. Everyone had already decided he was guilty. A black man accused of a violent crime in one of the city's richest neighborhoods. No witnesses, no alibi, and the media painted him as a monster. But then she walked in, Emma Parker, a rising star in a high-powered law firm, blonde, polished, confident. The kind of lawyer who made headlines, not sacrifices. No one could understand why she took his case. Not her firm. Not the press. Not even her own parents. Emma had been on track to become the youngest partner in her firm's history. But when she read the case file, something didn't sit right. The timelines didn't match. The evidence was paper-thin. And the man they were calling a killer? He sat in that courtroom, silent, calm, almost too calm for someone whose life was about to be taken away. His name was Marcus Hale. A former schoolteacher, now jobless and living in a rundown part of the city. But there was something in his eyes that told a different story. Not fear. Not guilt. Something deeper, like a man carrying a secret too heavy to speak. Emma couldn't explain it, but she knew she couldn't walk away. Even if it cost her everything. And it did. The moment she stood beside Marcus in court, the media turned on her. Headlines questioned her morals. Pundits tore apart her career. Her law firm called her into a boardroom one evening and quietly asked her to resign. Just like that, her six-figure salary, her downtown office, and her glowing reputation were gone. Friends stopped returning her calls. She walked into coffee shops and heard whispers behind her back. Her name became poison. But Emma didn't flinch. She spent nights going through the smallest pieces of evidence, security footage, phone records, old case notes. She talked to people no one else bothered to interview. And the more she dug, the more the case fell apart. Still, no one wanted to hear it. The DA's office was pushing for a life sentence. The judge refused to allow key evidence. And the jury looked like they had already made up their minds. During the trial, Emma stood alone. Her voice cracked sometimes, but she kept going. She reminded the court that justice isn't about convenience. It's about truth. And when she looked at Marcus, something unspoken passed between them, like he knew she was risking everything for a man the world had already thrown away. And then came the verdict. Guilty. The courtroom exploded. Emma stood frozen, heart pounding. Marcus didn't move. He just nodded, like he expected this. The guards led him away in chains, and Emma sat down, hollowed out. She had lost. Everything. Her case. Her job. Her reputation. But what she didn't know was that the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because a week later, a mysterious package showed up on her doorstep. Inside was a flash drive. And on that flash drive? Proof. Proof that Marcus Hale had once been someone else entirely, a former top prosecutor with a flawless record. Years ago, he had tried to expose a cover-up involving powerful city officials and racially biased convictions. But before he could go public, his name was wiped from the system. His cases reassigned. And he vanished. Silenced. Forgotten. Until now. The evidence Emma found on that flash drive would change everything. But at what cost? Because the truth was never meant to come out. And the people who buried it? They were watching her now. She had already lost her career, her comfort, her safety. But what she was about to do next would make her a national symbol of courage, or a target. And somewhere, in a prison cell, Marcus Hale waited. Not for justice. But for the moment the world would finally hear his story. And hers. Because their lives were now tied together by one thing. The truth. And the truth was just getting started. Emma stared at the flash drive in her hand for a long time before slipping it into her laptop. Her heart was racing. She didn't know who had sent it, there was no return address, no note. Just a small, black drive that clicked into place like a loaded trigger. As the files opened on her screen, one by one, she leaned in closer. What she saw didn't just shake her, it scared her. Videos. Memos. Court transcripts. Sealed evidence logs. All tied to a man named Marcus J. Hale, Assistant District Attorney, 7 years ago. The name matched, but the face was different. Younger. Clean-cut. Wearing a crisp suit and standing at podiums, giving interviews about justice and fairness. In one video, he talked about his belief in reforming the system. About rooting out racism in sentencing. In another, he mentioned a case, the Dixon Files. Emma had never heard of it before. She dug deeper. One folder contained scanned copies of internal memos, messages from higher-ups in the DA's office. They warned Marcus to stay in his lane and to stop poking around in past convictions. Another one was harsher, drop the Dixon review. This isn't your fight. It ended with a chilling line, you're not untouchable, Hale. Emma sat back in her chair, shaken. The man she had defended, the man painted as a criminal, had once been on the other side of the courtroom. A prosecutor with a perfect record and a conscience. And then, nothing. His name vanished from public records. His bar license suspended without public explanation. That's when the dots started to connect. The reason Marcus Hale had seemed too calm during the trial, it wasn't because he didn't care. It was because he had been here before. He knew what this system could do to a man. He had seen it from the inside. And now, he was its victim. Emma couldn't sleep that night. She stayed up watching every second of footage, reading every file. A part of her wanted to call someone, maybe a reporter, maybe someone she used to trust, but she knew better. If this was real, if what she had just uncovered was even half true, then the people who covered it up were powerful. Dangerous. And they already knew who she was. The next morning, she went back to the prison. She needed to look Marcus in the eye and ask him herself. The guards led her to the interview room, and there he was, sitting straight-backed, hands folded. No cuffs this time. He watched her carefully as she sat down across from him. I know who you are, she said quietly. He didn't respond. Just stared. You were a prosecutor. You tried to take down corrupt officials. You got too close. They buried you. He finally spoke, voice low but steady. So, someone gave you the files. Emma nodded. He gave her a sad smile. Took them long enough. Why didn't you tell me, she asked, leaning forward. He sighed. Would you have believed me? A disgraced black man claiming to be a hero? That plays well in books, but not in courtrooms. Emma swallowed hard. I might have. I should have. Marcus looked her dead in the eyes. You were the only one who saw me as more than the headline. That was enough. Emma felt a lump rising in her throat. She wanted to say more, but the moment was too fragile. She glanced around the room, feeling suddenly exposed. Who sent me the drive, she asked. Marcus's face darkened. Probably someone who still believes the truth matters. Maybe someone who worked with me. I had friends, once. But if they've resurfaced now, it means they're scared too. Emma left the prison with her mind racing. The story was bigger than she thought. This wasn't just a wrongful conviction. It was a cover-up that stretched back years. And Marcus wasn't just an innocent man, he was a threat. A man who knew too much, silenced before he could speak. Now, through her, his voice might rise again. She needed help. But who could she trust? The media had already branded her as the lawyer who defended a monster. The firm wouldn't take her calls. Even the reporters who once followed her career like a rising star now wanted nothing to do with her. She was alone. And Marcus was still locked up. The next step was risky. She started tracking down the names mentioned in the files: judges, police officers, clerks. Most of them had retired, relocated, or simply vanished from public life. But one stood out: Leland Grant. A former deputy district attorney who had worked alongside Marcus during the Dixon investigation. According to records, he now lived in a gated community just outside the city. Emma drove there the next day. She found Grant in a backyard garden, older, grayer, and clearly surprised to see her. When she mentioned Marcus's name, his hands trembled. "I thought he was dead," Grant whispered. "No. He's in prison. For a crime he didn't commit." Grant looked around, lowered his voice. "We were warned. All of us. After Marcus started digging, things got ugly. Files disappeared. One of our team had a car accident the week before testifying. I took the hint. I resigned. I never looked back." "Why didn't you speak up?" she asked. "Because I have a family," he said. And back then, nobody wanted to hear the truth. Emma stood in silence. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became: this wasn't about one man. It was about a system built on silence and fear. And now, she was standing in the center of it. She thanked Grant and walked back to her car, the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. As she turned the ignition, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You're getting too close. Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Her hands tightened around the wheel. The message was clear. But so was her resolve. She had already lost everything. Now she had nothing left to lose. And she wasn't stopping. Emma drove through the city with the warning still fresh on her screen. The message hadn't just scared her, it confirmed that she was on the right track. Someone was watching. Someone didn't want the truth about Marcus Hale to come out. But now, every step forward felt like walking through a minefield. She didn't go home that night. Instead, she booked a room at a cheap motel under a different name. She left her phone behind and bought a burner at a gas station. Her instincts as a lawyer kicked in: protect the evidence, limit communication, and assume everything was being monitored. She backed up the flash drive to 3 separate encrypted USBs and locked them in different places: one in a bank deposit box, one mailed to an old professor she trusted, and one she kept on her at all times. If something happened to her, the files wouldn't disappear. The next morning, she met with someone she hadn't spoken to in years: Detective Lisa Moreno. They had worked on a civil case together long ago, and Emma remembered her as one of the few officers who didn't bend under pressure. Lisa had since retired after clashing with department leadership over an internal affairs case, but Emma knew if anyone would listen, it was her. At first, Lisa didn't believe her. "You're saying Marcus Hale was framed and erased?" she asked, crossing her arms. Emma slid the drive across the diner table. "See for yourself. Internal memos. Video testimony. Suppressed reports. They buried him." Lisa studied the files for over an hour without saying a word. When she finally looked up, her face was pale. This is bad. If even half of this is true, we're talking about a network of corruption that's been running unchecked for years." Emma nodded. "And I defended him in court with none of this. I was fighting blind. Now I know why they never let me access sealed documents." Lisa leaned in. "Be careful. People who keep secrets like this don't mind making someone disappear." Meanwhile, inside the prison, Marcus sat in his cell writing letters. Not to lawyers or judges, but to people. Former victims. Witnesses. Families impacted by the cases he once worked on. He didn't know if any of them would respond, but he knew some of those old files, especially Dixon, had left too many lives broken. Maybe someone out there still remembered. Maybe someone had a piece of the puzzle Emma didn't. One letter reached a woman named Nia Bell, whose brother was locked away 15 years ago based on a conviction Marcus had once investigated. Nia had always believed her brother was innocent, but when Marcus vanished from the DA's office, the case quietly closed. Now, seeing his letter, she felt a flicker of hope. She reached out to Emma through a secure email, offering documents she'd kept hidden for over a decade, documents that proved a key witness had recanted, but the statement was never submitted into evidence. Emma met Nia in a church basement. Nia, fierce and soft-spoken, handed over a manila envelope. "They told me I'd be in danger if I talked. I was scared. But now, I want the truth out, even if it costs me." Emma could see it clearly now. There were layers to this case. Marcus wasn't just silenced for what he tried to expose, he was made an example. And the people who buried him didn't just want to protect their reputations, they wanted to protect a pattern. A system that quietly locked away people of color, erased dissent, and called it justice. The deeper she went, the more she realized how lonely the road ahead would be. And then came the fire. One night, while reviewing the Dixon files in her motel room, Emma got a call from the front desk. "Ma'am, there's smoke coming from the unit next to yours." She ran outside. Flames were licking the windows. She watched as firefighters burst into the unit beside hers, an empty one, she'd thought. When they put the fire out, the investigator told her it had started near the wall shared with her room. Electrical. Emma didn't believe that for a second. She packed everything and left before sunrise. They were closing in, and now it wasn't just Marcus they wanted to silence. She reached out to Lisa again. "I need someone watching my back," she said. Lisa agreed. She knew too well how these things were handled, quietly, with no headlines. Meanwhile, across the city, a journalist named Elijah Cross had been tracking Emma's story. Once a top reporter for a national outlet, he'd been blacklisted years ago for refusing to bury a story on police misconduct. Now, working independently, Elijah saw something in Emma's case that smelled like the stories no one dared publish. He emailed her from an encrypted address. "I believe you. Let's talk." Emma met him at a train station, surrounded by noise, with cameras and wires hidden in her coat. She told him everything, from the case to the cover-up, to the fire that nearly took her out. Elijah listened, nodding, his fingers already typing notes into a hidden device. "You have proof?" he asked. "I have enough to crack this wide open," she said. "But I need a platform. A big one." Elijah paused. "You'll get it. But once this is public, they'll come harder." Emma exhaled. "Let them." But even as she spoke the words, she felt the weight of what was coming. She wasn't just fighting for Marcus anymore. She was fighting for every name buried under years of silence. Every family torn apart. Every life discarded like it didn't matter. And she was running out of time. Because the people in power weren't waiting. They were preparing. Emma sat in Elijah's tiny studio, surrounded by soundproof walls and scattered notebooks. The hum of his outdated recording equipment filled the room as he leaned forward and whispered, "This isn't just a feature. This is the kind of story that makes people resign, or disappear." She knew he was right. The files, the witness statements, Marcus's letter, the threats, it was all coming together. But it was still missing one thing, undeniable public proof. They needed something the world couldn't ignore. Something visual. Something that couldn't be buried under legal jargon or dismissed by cable news pundits. Lisa called that night. Her voice was tense. "Emma, you need to see this." She had tracked down an ex-court clerk who worked on the Dixon case. The woman, Carla Jameson, had kept copies of audio logs and sealed court recordings from the time Marcus tried to reinvestigate the wrongful conviction. One of those tapes included a private meeting between Marcus and a senior judge. On it, the judge could be heard saying, "You're getting in over your head, Hale. If you keep pressing, we'll make sure you're no longer a problem." Emma listened to the tape 3 times. The voice was clear. The intent was undeniable. It was the piece they needed. But getting it out would be dangerous. Elijah reached out to a former contact at a national news podcast, someone brave enough to take the risk. They agreed to feature it, but only if they could verify every word, every timestamp. The upload was scheduled for Sunday morning. It was Wednesday. Emma didn't sleep a minute after that call. By Friday, Emma noticed a black SUV trailing her again. Not close, but close enough for her to notice. She changed routes. Switched cars. Elijah's apartment was swept for bugs, and Lisa started sleeping with her old service weapon beside her bed. The pressure was closing in fast. Meanwhile, Marcus was moved. Without warning, without paperwork. His cell was suddenly empty, and none of the guards gave answers. Emma's calls to the prison were met with vague responses: under medical review, routine transfer, no comment. Panic set in. Emma stormed into the courthouse demanding to speak to someone, anyone in charge. She was ignored, then escorted out. Cameras caught her shouting as she was pushed down the steps, and that night, a blurry clip of her went viral. "Disgraced lawyer loses it outside courthouse," the caption read. But the clip worked in their favor. Public interest reignited. Elijah released a teaser for the upcoming episode. A 30-second audio bite of the judge's voice, threatening Marcus. The internet exploded. Hashtags trended overnight. Old articles about Marcus's fall resurfaced. New ones questioned Emma's firm, the DA's office, the pattern of convictions they had buried for years. But still, no one knew where Marcus was. Lisa pulled every string she had left. Through an old friend in corrections, she got a tip: Marcus was being held in a private wing of a federal holding facility, under protective watch. That usually meant one thing: they were either preparing to transfer him, or silence him. Emma raced to the facility. This time, she didn't go alone. She brought Nia Bell, Elijah, and 2 civil rights attorneys who agreed to file an emergency motion. Media crews followed. Security tried to stop them, but with cameras rolling, they couldn't hide what was happening. Inside, after hours of delay, Emma was finally allowed in. Marcus sat behind thick glass, thinner than before, eyes tired, beard longer. But he smiled when he saw her. "They're scared," he said quietly. Emma pressed her hand to the glass. "We're almost there. Sunday morning, the world hears your voice." Marcus shook his head slowly. "They won't let it happen. You know that, right?" "I know," she whispered. "But I'm not stopping." That night, Emma's motel door was kicked in. She wasn't inside. She'd already moved again. But the message was clear: this wasn't about intimidation anymore. It was a countdown. Saturday, Lisa received another call. Someone had broken into her apartment. Files were missing. But they hadn't taken the most important one, the original Dixon folder. That was with Elijah, who had already handed a copy to the podcast producer under secure protection. Still, the pressure was suffocating. That evening, just hours before the podcast would go live, Elijah vanished. Emma waited for him outside the studio. He never came. His car was found parked under a bridge. Empty. His laptop was gone. Phone smashed. The podcast team delayed the release. Emma screamed at them in the parking lot. "That's exactly what they want. If we stop now, they win." But the team was scared. Without Elijah, without the source, the legal risk was too high. She returned to her car and sat for a long time, watching the city lights flicker as her world unraveled. Everything had built to this moment: proof, momentum, voices rising, and now it was slipping through her hands. She turned the key, gripped the wheel, and drove straight to the courthouse, her mind spinning. If they were going to stop her from telling the truth in court, then maybe she had to tell it somewhere else. Somewhere louder. Somewhere the world had to listen. And with the last copy of the audio file in her bag, she walked into the city's largest church the next morning. Right as Sunday service began, filled with hundreds of people, and cameras already rolling. What happens next would shock the entire country. The church was already full when Emma stepped inside, the last echoes of a choir song fading through the air. Families sat in polished pews, heads bowed in quiet prayer. The pulpit stood tall at the front, framed by stained glass windows that filtered golden light across the sanctuary. Emma didn't hesitate. She walked straight down the center aisle, heart pounding, eyes locked on the pastor who had just stepped up to speak. He paused when he saw her. "Emma Blake," he said softly into the mic, his voice reaching every corner of the church. "You look like a woman with something to say." She climbed the steps to the stage and turned to face the crowd. A few people recognized her. Murmurs spread. Phones came out. Someone started live streaming. And as the camera lights blinked on, Emma reached into her bag and pulled out the flash drive. "I know this isn't what you came here for today," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "But this can't wait." She plugged the drive into the church's projector system. A moment of silence. Then, Marcus's voice filled the sanctuary. The audio was scratchy, but unmistakable. "You're getting in over your head, Hale. If you keep pressing, we'll make sure you're no longer a problem." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emma spoke again. "That was Marcus Hale, the man I defended. A man they tried to erase. This is what got him imprisoned. Not guilt. Not evidence. Just truth they didn't want exposed." As the audio played, someone in the back of the church stood and walked out. Emma caught the figure only for a second, but it was enough. Gray suit. Bald head. She knew that face. It was Assistant DA Ronald Kemp, the same man who led the original prosecution against Marcus. Lisa, who had quietly entered the church just minutes earlier, slipped outside to follow him. Emma didn't stop speaking. She recounted the Dixon case, the erased witness statements, the sealed files, and Marcus's mysterious disappearance. And she ended with one chilling sentence. "If something happens to me, or Marcus, this story won't die with us. It's already been sent to journalists, lawyers, and human rights groups. If you're watching this, it's already too late to bury it again." The livestream exploded online. Within minutes, clips were being reshared on Twitter, TikTok, and major news channels. The words "church confession" and "Emma Blake speaks out" began trending. Emma had just forced the entire country to listen. But then came the twist no one saw coming. Just as Emma stepped down from the pulpit, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line of text. "You think Marcus told you everything?" Her breath caught. She looked around the room. Was someone watching? Following her? The message was followed by a file drop link. Back at Lisa's apartment, they opened it together, and what they saw turned everything upside down. It was an old sealed video. The timestamp showed it was recorded 8 years ago. In it, Marcus wasn't speaking to the DA or a judge. He was speaking to a grand jury. And he was naming names: judges, cops, prosecutors, dozens of people involved in a coordinated effort to hide misconduct in the legal system. It was detailed. Names, dates, locations. He wasn't just uncovering a wrongful conviction. He was blowing the lid off an entire structure of systemic corruption. But then came the real shock. At the end of the video, Marcus stared straight into the camera. "There's one person who helped me gather all this," he said. "Someone who now works for the very firm that's trying to destroy me. Her name is Emma Blake. And if anything happens to me, you'll know she was part of it." Emma froze. The room spun. Lisa turned to her, stunned. "What the hell does that mean?" I don't know," Emma whispered, shaking her head. "That can't be right. I never worked with him. Not before the trial." But she remembered something. A brief internship, years ago. A filing job at the DA's office while she was still in law school. She was assigned to data entry, transferring old case files into digital archives. And one of those files, she remembered seeing the name Dixon on a header. Marcus must have seen her name on the logs. Maybe he thought she was helping. Or maybe he believed she betrayed him when he was silenced. Emma's world cracked again. Was Marcus using her now? Or had he trusted her from the beginning, trusted her to finish what he started, even if she never knew it? Lisa spoke, her voice low. You just became part of the story in a way no one saw coming. Suddenly, every threat, every warning, it all made sense. They weren't just trying to stop her from helping Marcus. They were afraid of what she might remember. What she might uncover from her own past. And now the truth was out in the world, but so was a dangerous new question. Was Emma Blake the hero of this story? Or had she been part of the machine all along? There was only one way to find out. And time was running out. Emma stared at the screen, her hands trembling. The video of Marcus's grand jury testimony was still playing, looping over and over. Her name echoed in her mind like a hammer, Emma Blake. Emma Blake helped me. Was it a mistake? A misread? Or had she been part of this web all along without ever realizing? She didn't have time to unravel the past. The city was already boiling over. Her church confession had gone viral. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse by morning. Reporters camped out in front of City Hall. And people were finally saying Marcus Hale's name not with suspicion, but with outrage. The same media that had once crucified him now demanded answers. Why had the files been sealed? Why was he moved without cause? Why had a grand jury tape been buried? The district attorney's office went quiet. The mayor issued a carefully worded statement about transparency and reform. But behind the scenes, the legal machine was panicking. Lisa got a call from the federal court. An emergency hearing had been scheduled. Marcus would be brought in to testify in front of a new judge. Emma was summoned too, not just as his former attorney, but as a key witness. She stood outside the courthouse that morning, crowds chanting behind barricades, the air thick with tension. Marcus stepped out of the armored transport van, shackled, guarded on all sides. But when he looked up and saw her, he nodded. They walked in together, shoulder to shoulder. The courtroom was packed. News cameras weren't allowed inside, but dozens of sketch artists scribbled furiously. Emma took the stand first. She told everything, how she took the case, how her firm abandoned her, how she found the missing evidence. She admitted she didn't know Marcus back when he first tried to blow the whistle. She had no idea he remembered her from years ago. But then the judge asked her, "Do you believe you were placed in that law firm by design? That your past connection to Mr. Hale was more than coincidence?" Emma hesitated. Her voice cracked. "I don't know. But I believe now that nothing about this case was ever random." Then Marcus took the stand. He was calm. Precise. He explained how he uncovered systemic corruption while working as a top prosecutor. How he tried to expose it through official channels. How, after he was silenced, he saw Emma's name years later on internal logs and clung to it, not as an accusation, but as hope. "I believed she didn't know what she was part of," he said. "But I also believed she'd remember. And when she did, she'd do the right thing." The courtroom fell silent. It was the moment that changed everything. Within hours, the judge ordered Marcus Hale's immediate release. Charges dropped. Record expunged. A formal inquiry was launched into the district attorney's office, the private prison contracts, and several top judges. Emma's name was cleared. Elijah, who had been missing for days, was finally located, beaten, shaken, but alive. He had gone into hiding after a direct threat, hoping to keep the last backup of Marcus's evidence safe. He returned to a hero's welcome. As Marcus walked free for the first time in years, the crowd outside erupted in applause. People cried. Some held up signs that read, "Justice delayed is not justice denied." Emma stood on the courthouse steps beside him. Her phone buzzed with calls, reporters, law schools, human rights groups, even film studios. But she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was just watching Marcus breathe free air again. He turned to her quietly and said, "I never blamed you." "I know," she whispered. but I blamed myself. They both smiled, tired but alive. But just when it seemed the storm had finally passed, one last message came through, sent anonymously. A photo. It showed Emma as a young intern, barely 21, in a hallway at the DA's office. Behind her, blurred but unmistakable, was a man now presumed dead, Judge Whitmore, the same judge who had threatened Marcus years ago. Only he wasn't dead. The photo was dated just 2 months ago. Attached to the image was one line. "You exposed the system. But the architect is still alive." Emma stared at the screen, pulse rising again. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. Emma sat on a park bench just a few blocks from the courthouse, watching as kids played in the distance and leaves rustled in the soft wind. The photo of Judge Whitmore was still open on her phone. Part of her wanted to chase it, dig deeper, find out where he'd been hiding and why he was still alive after being declared dead 5 years ago. But for now, she needed a pause. Not an end, just a breath. Marcus was safe. That mattered most. He had been moved to a secure location for a few weeks, under protection, while the Department of Justice conducted their investigation. Emma had been contacted by 3 Senate aides already, asking her to speak in upcoming hearings about legal reform. She declined them all, for now. This wasn't about attention. It was about people. The headlines had changed. White attorney risks career to save falsely accused black man. Marcus Hale speaks after years in silence. Systemic cover-up under federal review. The public was watching. Talking. Finally asking the right questions. But Emma didn't feel victorious. Not really. Justice hadn't been served in a neat package. It had been clawed from the ground, piece by piece, and only because so many people, Lisa, Elijah, Reverend Daniels, the protesters, and even strangers online, refused to let go. Lisa returned to the diner, back behind the counter, but now with customers who asked her about legal updates and civil rights. Elijah started a podcast, using his platform to interview people wrongfully convicted. His first guest? Marcus Hale. It went viral within a day. Emma met with her old firm's managing partner one last time. He offered her a public apology and a possible return. She politely declined. She'd already begun the paperwork to launch her own practice, one focused on criminal defense and wrongful convictions. Not big cases. Not TV trials. Just real people who needed someone to listen, believe, and fight. One afternoon, as she cleared boxes out of her apartment, she found the original manila folder she'd carried when she first met Marcus. His mugshot was clipped to the top, faded and folded at the corners. She stared at it for a long time. So much had changed since then. Not just in the case, but in her. She had walked into that courtroom believing she could win with facts and law alone. But she had learned the hard way that the truth wasn't always enough when the system didn't want to hear it. She lost everything before the truth finally broke through. But in the loss, she found something bigger. Courage. Purpose. A voice she didn't know she had. Later that week, she and Marcus sat in a quiet coffee shop, no cameras, no press. "They're watching now," he said, stirring a small spoon through his tea. The world finally saw behind the curtain. Emma nodded. But what happens when the next curtain falls? Marcus smiled, tired but thoughtful. Then we lift it too. They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. As they parted ways outside, Emma looked up at the sky. It was clear. Still. The city buzzed around her, but something inside her had quieted. Not finished, but steadied. The story of the white lawyer who defended a black man everyone thought was guilty had reached its end. Not because justice had been perfectly served, but because the truth had finally spoken louder than fear. The real twist wasn't just that Marcus had once been a top prosecutor silenced for telling the truth. It was that someone who had unknowingly been a part of that silence had chosen to break it. And that's what stuck with people. Not the trial. Not the scandal, but the sacrifice. The courage. The reminder that behind every case, every headline, every courtroom, are human beings trying to be heard. Emma Blake didn't win in the way she once imagined. But in standing by Marcus, in losing everything and still choosing to fight, she became something more than a lawyer. She became proof that even in the darkest corners of the justice system, someone can still choose the light. And maybe, just maybe, that choice is enough to change everything.